what we came to talk about. I'm not so interested in showing off my house. I'm more interested in talking about economic opportunity, because that's where we're dying, and how we can work together under that umbrella. So we do a lot of that work through the clinic. I'm not sure if you come down to Marin City Health and Wellness Center, but we do lots of work around equity, and we try to put people together, but it has to be intentional, because I feel like time is short, and talking about race is exhausting. I come from, I'm a mixed family, and I've heard conversation from both sides, and to make progress, I just feel like it has to be intentional.
Okay, thank you, Javon. Okay, this next question is for you, Tim. It says, as an anti-racist educator, are you aware that most ethnic races don't like to be addressed as people of color? The white self-proclaimed intellectuals who coined this term did not see the irony of its expression. How could they assume the white supremacy of so-called others, people of color?
Well, if I'm interpreting the question right, I do know that there are folks who don't like the term. And I know that our language around race and the terminology is almost by definition imprecise. I mean, it's really all crap at the end of the day. And the reason it's crap is because all of the language, whether it's white, black, people of color, Caucasian, all these terms are scientifically illegitimate and meaningless. They're biologically meaningless. They're scientifically meaningless. There's no such thing as white people scientifically, no such thing as black people scientifically, no such thing as Caucasian is this ridiculous pseudoscientific term that we thought up to describe people from the Caucasus Mountain region, which almost none of us are from, actually. In fact, the two guys that were the Boston Marathon bombers are actually from there, but they didn't describe their ass as white, right? So I mean, like, they are the anthropological definition of white people, and yet they were racialized as non-white people. So it's all nonsense. And I realized that the term, I mean, you know, for instance, the term people of color, yeah, was really sort of crafted by academics. Now, many of them were, in fact, black and brown academics. It wasn't simply white folks, but it was academics, as was the term African American. That's a term that essentially originates in the academy, more or less. And so all of these terms are flawed. And I think the reason that we probably do it, and I'll only speak really for myself, although I think this is probably the reason a lot of people say white folks, like I'll use the term white folks, even though I know, again, that, you know, scientifically this is sort of meaningless, and it also changes from generation to generation in terms of who qualifies. And the reason I'll say folks of color or persons of color, or sometimes I say black and brown folks as another way of saying it, is that when you're trying to communicate concepts to people, you do have to start with language they recognize and that they can easily grasp. This is just as a mimetic device. I could craft some other term. I remember having an argument with somebody years ago that was like, well, you should just call white people pink because that's what they really are. It's like, this is asinine, because, you know, it's like no, by the time I say pink people, then you're gonna spend the next 45 seconds going, what the hell is he talking about? And everything I said for that 45 seconds, you're not gonna understand. Or if I were to say, like, if I say indigenous people, well, there are like 700 recognized and unrecognized indigenous nations in this country. Obviously, I can't say them all, right? I'm not going to be able to go down the list of every one, even though I realize that some indigenous folks don't like that term. Some folks like Native American, some folks don't. Some folks politically choose American Indian as a designation. So none of these terms are perfect, and I think the best we can probably do is say that when someone tells you that they prefer a certain term, then that's the one you use with them, right? It's why it's always amazing to me when white folks, and they will say this, and I'm sure people who are not white in this room have heard this, right? You know, especially black folks. It's like, well, what do you want to be called? Do you want to be called black or African American? I mean, I just can't keep up with it. It's two damn things. How hard is it to keep up with? It's two things. You can't keep up with two. You remember passwords for every damn. You remember your Facebook password. Or you have it automatically programmed in, so just program that shit in then. Just say black, African American, and then if I say black and you say you prefer African American, or you prefer African in America, or you prefer person of African descent, then next time I'm talking to you, I'm going to use that one. But if I say African American, you say you prefer black, you just say that. This goes back to some extent to the question about being worried about messing up, right? I mean, like, the reality is we're going to mess up, and usually we're going to mess up over much bigger stuff than the words. Right? I mean, the language is like a minor mishap. You screw that up and you can go, oh, okay, and now I know what you want me to call you. And whereas most of the screw-ups are a lot bigger. So I definitely think that the term persons of color is problematic. I don't know necessarily what works better, because I can say black and brown, and I do say black and brown, but then folks will say, well, then they assume that just means black and Latino. Now, I don't necessarily mean it that way. When I say black and brown, I'm really saying black and all other persons of color who are not black, right, who have other racialized experiences, but I realize they're not the same either. So, you know, I'm always open to suggestions about the better language to use, but I also think that sometimes getting bogged down in that, other than in the moment when you want to obviously use terms that people prefer when you're talking to them, distracts us from some of the bigger stuff, which is not whether I'm saying persons of color, black and brown, white folks, or persons of European descent. It's the systems that uphold some of those and diminish others, right? Not to say language isn't important. I'm just saying that sometimes that part of the discussion can become a bit of a side debate, right?
Okay, and before we get to this next question, Javon, you want to add anything on to that of color? You sure? Ms. Nancy? Because it's good to hear from some people who are supposed to be of color. What you think about the terminology?
Right? I've already made it clear that I'm black.
Okay.
And that's what I like to be called today.
Ms. Nancy? No, you good?
I mean, it's so obvious who I am until.
I just only want to add on to that with the of color is I think it's a way of mushing people together, and I think that's the issue in America is an issue of identity. And so when you had a group who was forcibly taken and then being forced all the time to fit into other people's boxes, it's kind of like you're doing more damage than asking the person, well, where are you from? And I do that a lot. You know, I'm asking, what country are you from? What tradition are you from? And they're cool with it. So I just think sometimes it depends on the lens of the person. And so for me, it's like I'm really not of color. I'm part of the color that created all the other colors. I learned that in science. And everybody understands all the black folks. So I don't have to go on. I'm sorry, I just had to be honest, get also clear. Okay, this next one is like 3 questions about Donald Trump. So you see me going through these papers, I'm like, oh Lord. Okay, so it's for all of y'all, okay? So one says, let me see, how discouraged are you by Donald Trump's presidency, and how can we use it to achieve greater equity? Okay, next one is, my Tea Party relatives from Virginia and Texas are not going to be educated out of their white entitlement and white supremacy beliefs. How are you succeeding with them? I hope a lot of those people. How has Trump impacted your work? And the last one is, given that an incredibly racist President Trump and racist Republican dominated Congress, and our government, what can we do? Could you all answer these questions?
Y'all want to go first?
I would love to go first. I was at this conference recently, and it was right after Donald Trump won, and everybody was all crazy, and they put us in these groups, and I was, at this group with 3 white persons at the group, and the question was like, oh my God, now that Donald Trump won, what is possible that wasn't possible before? And there were all these questions around Donald Trump, and it just has been, it's devastating that Donald Trump won, but it's a little humorous to see everybody else have the meltdown that we've been having our whole life. So, as they came back to our table, I just didn't know. I said, I don't really know how to answer this. Everything that I was doing before he won, I'm going to keep doing, and everything that, I wasn't doing, I'm probably not going to do. But the thing is, to me, it feels like a lot like police brutality, right? We kept telling people the police are beating us, the police are killing us, and then this wonderful cell phone camera came out, and we could film it. Well, and then we're like, look, the police are beating us down. I feel like we've been trying to talk about Donald Trump in all of his different faces for a long time, and now he's president. And so now, bam, there you go. You guys deal with that. We can vote him in.
question.
About Donald Trump, what is his
Just whatever you want to say about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I just feel like,
We've been saying this all the time. We've been talking about this all the time. This is the reason that grassroots exists, because there is inequity, there's an inequality, that people are not fair. And for all of you that consider yourself fair, where have you been? What are you doing? We've been saying it for a long time. So thank you, Mr. Trump. Because all of a sudden, people go, oh, my. Yes, oh, my.
I can't add a lot to that, but I will say, because that was all exactly what I would have said, not nearly as well, but that was really good stuff. The only thing I would say, it's sort of like, I was using this analogy with some folks in the reception before. I don't know, many of you will recall back in the day when NFL games were only on CBS on Sundays. And it was before Fox had some of the games. And, so on Sunday there would always be 2 games. There was a noon game, at least in the Central Time Zone where I was, and there was a 3 o'clock game. And the 3 o'clock game, and now if you're on the West Coast, this didn't happen because it would always be live for you. It would just be earlier. But if you were on the East Coast or in Central, it would always preempt the first 15 minutes of 60 minutes on Sunday nights. It would bleed over into the 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Eastern hour. And so you join 60 minutes. They'd start 15 minutes late, and the announcer would come on and he would say, now back to your regularly scheduled program. That's what this election was, right? It was back to your regularly scheduled programming. The 8 years of Obama, that was the glitch. You understand? Everyone's sort of oh my God, how could this happen? Well, how could what? How could the use of race and racial scapegoating to win an election, how could that work? Well, you just saw Lee Atwater talking about doing that going back 40 years. How could dividing and conquering working people by playing upon their racial fears work? That goes back to the 1670s. It goes back to the colonies. So it's not how could it work, it's how would it not work? Why would we be at all surprised? If you saw the SNL skit the week after the election, right? It was the most brilliant sketch that they had done in years. Dave Chappelle came back and Chris Rock came back, right? And it was Dave Chappelle with his 4 white friends in their Brooklyn apartment, which that in and of itself was perfect if you know what's going on in Brooklyn right now, right? So you got these 4 white folks and their black friend, Dave Chappelle, in the loft, and they're watching the returns, right? The returns start, and they're all excited. The white folks are like, oh, it's gonna be a historic night. And Dave Chappelle's character says, yeah, it's going to be a long night, all right, and they're all convinced Hillary Clinton's going to win, and Dave is not, right? He is not convinced because he's been around a moment, and he's black in America, and he sort of knows what's possible, and the returns start to come in, and the faces of the white folks are sinking, and they're all like, well, Vermont is still out there, and, Dave Chappelle's character says, oh, snap, Vermont with its 4 electoral college votes, because he knows what they still don't know, and then it happens, right, and Trump wins, and they're all, oh my God, and at this point, Chris Rock's characters come in, and I think the line is, this is the most racist thing that's ever happened in America. And Chris Rock says, really, the most racist thing that's ever happened? And Dave Chappelle's character says, yeah, my great-grandfather used to tell me about this, but what did he know? He was a slave, So the whole point, right, was to demonstrate that white privilege isn't just about all that material stuff that we talked a little bit about in the film. It's about the psychology of just being able to check out on the stuff that people of color know from the time they're 9. And that is something that applies to not only the people who voted for Donald Trump, but just as much, if not more so, to the people who didn't and never would vote for Donald Trump, who also had the luxury of checking out and then being knocked on their ass by surprise at something that people of color sort of knew was pretty much standard operating procedure. And I realize now I lied and I said I didn't have much to add.